Welcome back to Night Whisper. Tonight, we're stepping into the shadows, pulling back the curtain on one of the most enduring and unsettling legends in modern history. The Men in Black. These aren't the charismatic heroes you see in movies. The real Men in Black are something far more mysterious. Figures who emerge from the periphery of reality right after a UFO sighting crosses some unseen line. Imagine this. You've just witnessed something impossible in the sky. A strange light, a silent craft moving in ways no known aircraft should. You're shaken, questioning what you saw. Then, a few days later, there's a knock on your door. Standing there are two, sometimes three, individuals. They're dressed in immaculate, often old-fashioned, black suits. Their faces are unnaturally pale, almost waxy. Their eyes are dark, piercing, and they don't seem to blink enough. They might arrive in a brand new, yet vintage-looking black car or Cadillac. Perhaps that seems out of place in time. They know your name. They know what you saw. They don't introduce themselves with any verifiable credentials, but they speak with an authority that's deeply unnerving. The questions are pointed, probing every detail of your experience. But they aren't just gathering information. They're sowing seeds of doubt and fear. They might subtly, or not so subtly, warn you to forget what you saw, to stop talking about it, for your own good, for your family's safety. And when they leave, they take more than just your story. They take your certainty, leaving behind a chilling sense of dread and the feeling that you've brushed up against a power you cannot comprehend. For decades, these eerie visits have followed a chillingly consistent pattern. Are they clandestine government agents from a hidden branch of the military or intelligence community, tasked with suppressing public knowledge of extraterrestrial visitation? Or are they something far stranger, something not quite human, wearing a poorly fitting disguise to walk among us? Before we dive deeper into the stories and evidence, I want to hear from you. Drop your theories in the comments below. Who, or what, do you think the Men in Black really are? Now, let's turn the page on the first documented case that brought these shadowy figures into the light. Our journey begins in 1947, the same year as the infamous Roswell incident, with a man named Harold Dahl. Dahl was a harbor patrolman in Tacoma, Washington. One summer day, he claimed to have witnessed 6 donut-shaped objects flying over Maury Island. One of them seemed to be in trouble, spewing hot, metallic slag that rained down, damaging his boat and injuring his son. The next morning, Dahl said he was approached by a man in a dark suit, driving a black 1947 Buick. The man treated Dahl to breakfast at a local diner and recounted the previous day's events in perfect details. Dahl had told anyone. The man then issued a stark warning. Keep quiet about the incident, if he valued his family as well. This encounter with Harold Dahl is widely considered the genesis of the Men in Black phenomenon. It set the template, a UFO sighting, followed by an intimidating visit from a mysterious suited figure who knew too much. This pattern didn't stop in the 40s. It intensified during the UFO flap of the 1950s and 60s. One of the most famous and influential cases is that of Dr. Albert K. Bender. Bender was a UFO researcher and the founder of the International Flying Saucer Bureau, or IFSB. In 1953, he was on the verge of publishing a groundbreaking discovery in his newsletter that he believed would solve the flying saucer mystery. Suddenly, he shut everything down. He dissolved the IFSB, stopped the publication, and refused to speak about his research. His final, cryptic message warned other researchers to be exceedingly cautious. Years later, Bender revealed his story in his book, Flying Saucers and the Three Men. He claimed he was visited by 3 men in black who had seemingly materialized in his bedroom. He described them not as human agents, but as something else entirely. Their eyes glowed, and they communicated with him telepathically, warning him that his research was getting too close to the truth. They imparted a terrifying message about their origins and purpose, a message that left Bender so profoundly frightened that he abandoned his life's work overnight. Bender's experience cemented the idea that the IMB weren't just government spooks, but potentially non-human entities themselves. Let's dissect the common threads in these encounters. Witnesses consistently described the MIB's appearance as bizarre and off. Their skin is often described as unnaturally pale or sometimes oddly tan, with no blemishes or hair. Their facial features are sometimes described as vaguely Asian or exotic, but with a plastic-like quality. Their movements are stiff and robotic. Even their speech is strange, often monotone, with an odd cadence, using outdated slang as if they learned English from an old textbook. They seem to struggle with simple human customs. There are stories of them being fascinated by common objects, like a ballpoint pen or trying to eat jello with a knife. One classic account from the 1960s involves a family who was harassed after a UFO sighting. The man in black who visited them asked for a glass of water. When the homeowner returned, the MIB had placed a strange pill in the water, which began to fizz. He then explained it was for a stomach condition and drank it down, but the whole interaction was so bizarre and unnerving. It felt less like a person and more like an android trying to mimic human behavior. This otherness is a key element. If they are government agents, why the elaborate and often clumsy charade? Why not just show a badge and be direct? The sheer strangeness of their behavior seems designed to intimidate and disorient, to make the witness question not only what they saw in the sky, but their own sanity. The vehicles they use are another piece of the puzzle. They are almost always black, usually large, American sedans like Cadillacs or Buick. But witnesses often report that these cars are in pristine, showroom condition, even if the model is decades old. Sometimes, the license plates are missing or bear strange, unidentifiable symbols. In some cases, after the MIB drive away, the car simply seems to vanish into thin air. It adds to the feeling that these encounters are not rooted in our ordinary reality. It's as if they arrive from a different place, a different time, and their technology, just like their appearance, is a slightly distorted mirror of our own. So what are the leading theories? The first and most straightforward is the government agent theory. This posits that the MIB are operatives from a deeply classified faction of the government, perhaps a special unit within the Air Force, CIA, or NA. Their job is to manage the UFO-UAP phenomenon by intimidating witnesses into silence and confiscating evidence. This would explain their knowledge of the sightings and their authoritative demeanor. The strange behavior could be a psychological warfare tactic, a deliberate act to discredit the witness. If you tell someone you were threatened by an agent who acted like a robot and didn't know how to eat, who's going to believe you? It's a perfect way to muddy the waters and make the entire event sound like a delusion. But this theory doesn't fully account for the high strangeness, the glowing eyes, the telepathic communication, the disappearing cars. This leads us to the second, more paranormal theory, the extraterrestrial or ultra-terrestrial theory. This suggests the MIB are not human at all. They could be the aliens themselves, or perhaps biological robots, androids sent by them to interact with us. Their awkwardness would be explained by their non-human nature, simply trying to blend in with a species they don't fully understand. Their motive: to control the narrative, to study our reactions, or to prevent humanity from discovering a truth we're not ready for. Researcher John Keel, who coined the term Men in Black, leaned into this idea, calling them ultra-terrestrials, beings who may coexist with us on Earth but on a different vibrational frequency, only becoming visible when they choose to. There's also a third, more psychological perspective, the TOPA, or thought form theory. This idea suggests that the Men in Black are not physical beings in the traditional sense, but are instead manifestations of our own collective consciousness. In the intense, high-energy emotional state following a UFO sighting, the witness's fear, paranoia, and expectation of a government cover-up could literally conjure these figures into existence. They are a physical projection of our cultural anxieties about secrecy and power. This would explain their dreamlike, inconsistent, and often nonsensical nature. They are walking, talking, archetypes pulled from our subconscious. Whatever their true origin, government agents, alien androids, or psychic projections, the effect of the Men in Black is undeniable. They represent the point where the UFO phenomenon stops being about lights in the sky and becomes deeply, terrifyingly personal. They are the guardians at the gate of a forbidden knowledge, and their message is always the same. Some things are not meant to be known. Their existence, whether real or imagined, serves as a powerful symbol of the secrecy and fear that surround the greatest mystery of our time. They are the reason we whisper. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the shadows of Night Whisper. I'm fascinated to hear which theory you find most compelling, or if you have one of your own. Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this exploration and want to dive into more mysteries with us, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what's coming next. Until then, keep looking up. But be careful who you tell. It's 1976, in the quiet coastal town of Old Orchard Beach, Maine. Dr. Herbert Hopkins, a respected physician and a passionate, part-time UFO investigator, is at home alone. He's poring over his case notes, deep in thought, when the silence is broken by the ringing of his telephone. It picks it up. The voice on the other end is strange calm, precise, almost robotic. The man introduces himself as a fellow UFO researcher, claiming he wants to discuss the very case Hopkins is working on. It's late, and the call is unexpected, but Hopkins's curiosity is piqued. He agrees to a meeting. The man says he'll be right over. Hopkins hangs up the phone, a little puzzled. He walks to his back porch to turn on the light, and just as he steps back into the hallway, there's a knock at the door. Moments. It had only been moments since the call ended. How could anyone have gotten there so fast? Hopkins opens the door, and what he sees will haunt him for the rest of his life. Standing before him is a man dressed in a flawless, crisp, black suit, complete with a black tie and a derby hat perched on his head. But it's not the suit that's unsettling, it's the man himself. His skin is dead white, like a mannequin, waxy and completely hairless. He has no eyebrows, no eyelashes. His lips are a vivid, almost painted-on slash of red against his pale face, and his movements. They're unnervingly smooth, deliberate, lacking any of the subtle, natural twitches and quirks of a normal human being. Hopkins, though deeply unnerved, invites the stranger inside. They sit in his living room. The man in black doesn't waste time with pleasantries. He begins asking incredibly detailed, pointed questions about the UFO case. Hopkins is investigating. He wants to know about the witnesses, the evidence, every little detail. All the while, his gaze is fixed on Hopkins' intense, unblinking stare that bores right through him. The atmosphere in the room grows thick with tension. As they talk, the visitor does something that pushes the encounter from merely strange into the realm of the impossible. He picks up a coin from a table, a regular penny. He tells Hopkins to watch it closely. As Hopkins stares, the man in black rubs the coin between his fingers. Slowly, impossibly, the coin begins to deep. It shimmers, turns a silvery blue, and then it's just gone. Vanished into thin air. The man in black looks directly at Hopkins. His voice, still flat and devoid of emotion, delivers a chilling command. Stop your work on this case. Never speak of it again. He states that Hopkins had 2 of these coins in his pocket, which was true. He tells him to take one out. Hopkins does. The man says, watch. And the penny in Hopkins's hand does the same thing. It shimmers and vanishes. As if this wasn't terrifying enough, the encounter takes another bizarre turn. The visitor's speech begins to slow down, becoming slurred and difficult to understand. His movements become stiff and jerky, like a machine running out of power. He stands up abruptly and announces, in a slow, halting voice, my energy is running low. I must go now. He walks stiffly to the door, turns, and says a final, cryptic goodbye. Then, he steps out into the night, and is gone. There's no sound of a car starting, no footsteps on the gravel path. He simply vanishes into the darkness, leaving behind a terrified Dr. Hopkins, and a house filled with an eerie silence. The effect on Dr. Hopkins was immediate and profound. That very night, shaken to his core, he gathered every single file, every note, every piece of research he had on UFOs, and destroyed it all. He burned his life's passion in a desperate attempt to erase the encounter. He canceled upcoming meetings with other researchers. He stopped taking calls about the subject, and he withdrew completely from the world of UFO investigation. The once curious and open-minded doctor became withdrawn and reticent, forever changed by the pale, hairless man in the black suit. What really happened that night in Old Orchard Beach? Was this a government agent? Using advanced psychological tactics? Was it an elaborate, cruel prank? Or was Dr. Hopkins visited by something not of this world, an entity sent to silence him? The details are so specific, so utterly strange, that they defy easy explanation. The waxy skin, the red lips, the dissolving coin, the claim of running low on energy. It all sounds like something from a science fiction movie, yet it was a real, life-altering experience for a credible, professional man. The story of Dr. Herbert Hopkins remains one of the most compelling and terrifying accounts of a man in black encounter ever recorded. It serves as a stark reminder that sometimes the truth we seek is far more alien and far more frightening than we could ever imagine. It's a calm summer morning in June 1947. The waters of Puget Sound are placid. The air is crisp. Harold Dahl is out on his patrol boat, the North Queen, working the waters near Maury Island. With him are his son, his dog, and a couple of crew members. It's just another day on the job, salvaging stray logs from the Sound. But this day would be anything but ordinary. It would become the day that birthed a legend. Suddenly, the sky above them changes. 6 enormous metallic, donut-shaped objects appear, hovering silently. Dole and his crew stare in disbelief. These things are massive, maybe 100 feet in diameter, with portholes glowing from within. They move with an unnatural grace, completely silent. Then, one of them seems to malfunction. It wobbles, dips, and begins to spew a strange, metallic substance. It rains down from the sky like hot, molten slag. Chaos erupts on the deck of the North Queen. The fiery debris pelts the boat, setting small fires. Harold's son is struck by a piece, his arm badly burned. Tragically, their dog is hit and killed instantly. The boat itself is damaged. As quickly as they appeared, the objects ascend, vanishing into the clouds. Shaken and terrified, Dahl steers his damaged boat back to shore, his mind racing. What did he just witness? He managed to collect some of the strange, lightweight metallic fragments that had fallen onto his boat. They were unlike any material he had ever seen. Bicon Landau is hesitant. This story is too wild, too unbelievable. He decides to keep it quiet, sharing the details only with his supervisor, Fred Chrisman. Chrisman, intrigued, goes back to the island and confirms the evidence: scorched earth and more of the strange metallic fragments. The story begins to leak, catching the attention of an early UFO publisher named Ray Palmer. Palmer, known for his paranormal magazines, sees a huge story. He hires a man named Kenneth Arnold to investigate. Now, Kenneth Arnold is a name you might recognize. Just a few days after Dahl's encounter, Arnold himself had a famous sighting over Mount Rainier, where he reported seeing 9 crescent-shaped objects flying at incredible speeds. He was the one who coined the term flying saucer. So, when Palmer sends Arnold to look into Dahl's story, it's a meeting of 2 of the earliest figures in UFO history. Arnold is skeptical but agrees to fly to Tacoma to investigate. But before Arnold even arrives, something deeply unsettling happens to Harold Dahl. The morning after the incident, he receives a mysterious phone call. A man with a monotone voice tells him they need to meet for breakfast. The next day, Dahl agrees at a local diner. He's met by a man who is off. He's tall, thin, and wears a pristine black suit, which seems odd for a casual breakfast meeting. The man's face is pale, his features sharp and emotionless. Without any introduction, the man in black begins to recount Dahl's experience on the water from the day before, describing every single detail with chilling accuracy. He knows about the 6 objects, the falling debris, his son's injury, even the death of his dog. Dahl is stunned into silence. How could this stranger possibly know all this? Then, the man leans in and delivers a quiet, yet terrifying, warning. He tells Dahl that what he saw was real, but that he should forget it ever happened. He says, and I quote, "What I've said is proof to you that I know a great deal more about this experience of yours than you will want to believe." He tells Dahl that speaking about it further would only bring harm to him and his family. The man then stands up, places a crisp new bill on the table, and walks out, disappearing into the morning crowd. This encounter leaves Dahl utterly Terrified, the man didn't threaten him with overt violence, but the implication was crystal clear. It was a cold, calculated psychological threat. This wasn't just some prankster. This was someone, or something, with an impossible level of knowledge and a clear agenda. Silence. This meeting is widely considered the very first documented Men in Black encounter in modern history. The eerie, calm demeanor, the black suit, the impossible knowledge, the veiled threat it set, the template for thousands of similar stories to come. Shaken to his core, Dahl's resolve crumbles. He wants nothing more to do with this. When Kenneth Arnold and his airline co-pilot, E.J. Smish, finally arrive, they meet with Dahl and Chrisman. Dahl is now a changed man. He's nervous, evasive, and seems desperate to distance himself from the story. He tells Arnold it was all a hoax, a prank that got out of hand. But Arnold isn't convinced. He can see the fear in Dahl's eyes. He can tell there's something more going on. Despite Dahl's retraction, Arnold and Smith collect a box full of the metallic fragments Dahl had gathered, intending to fly them back for analysis. This is where the story takes another dark and tragic turn. Army Air Force intelligence gets wind of the incident and dispatches two officers, Lieutenant Frank Brown and Captain William Davidson, to investigate. They meet with Arnold and Smith at the hotel in Tacoma, interview them, and take possession of the mysterious fragments, convinced of the story's authenticity. Brown and Davidson are eager to get the evidence back to their base. At Hamilton Field, they board their B-25 bomber, with the box of debris securely on board, and take off for McCord Field. But they never make it. Just a few hours into their flight, their B-25 bomber mysteriously catches fire and crashes near Kelso, Washington. Both Lieutenant Brown and Captain Davidson are killed. The crash is officially attributed to a faulty engine. But for those following the Maury Island story, the timing is far too convenient, far too sinister. The plane, the two officers tasked with the investigation, and most importantly, the physical evidence. The metallic fragments are all gone, consumed by the fire, with the key investigators dead and the evidence destroyed. The official story quickly unravels. The FBI gets involved and, based on Dahl's coerced retraction, labels the entire Maury Island incident a hoax. Harold Dahl and Fred Chrisman are hounded by the media and federal agents. They stick to the hoax story, likely out of fear for their safety and the well-being of their families. The man in the black suit had made his point. The case is officially closed, written off as a tall tale, but the legend was just beginning. For UFO researchers and enthusiasts, the Maury Island incident became a foundational case. It wasn't just about seeing strange things in the sky. It was about the aftermath, the systematic suppression of evidence, the intimidation of witnesses, and the tragic, timely deaths of the investigators. It introduced the world to the chilling concept of the men in black shadowy figures who work to keep the truth about UFOs buried, using fear and intimidation as their primary tools. Over the decades, the story has been debated endlessly. Was Harold Dahl telling the truth? Was he a simple working man who stumbled upon something extraordinary and paid the price? Or was it all an elaborate fabrication that spun wildly out of control? The official record says it's a hoax, but the details remain unsettling. The uncanny accuracy of the man in black's knowledge, the plane crash that conveniently eliminated the only physical evidence, the palpable fear that drove Dahl to retract his story. These elements have cemented the Maury Island incident not just as a UFO sighting, but as a conspiracy thriller. It's a story that suggests that maybe, just maybe, we are not alone, and that there are powerful forces at play dedicated to keeping that secret hidden, no matter the cost. What started as a strange morning on Puget Sound became the first chapter in a modern mythology that continues to fascinate and frighten us to this day. Imagine you're 19 years old, driving home on a warm summer night. Suddenly, a bright object streaks across the sky and seems to crash just ahead of you. What would you do? Would you stop? That's the exact situation a young man named Robert Richardson found himself in back in July 19 in Toledo, Ohio. What happened next would become one of the most chilling and classic cases in the strange lore of the Men in Black. It was a perfectly ordinary night. Robert was cruising along, minding his own business, when his car suddenly struck something hard. It wasn't another vehicle. and it wasn't an animal. Confused, he pulled over to investigate. There, on the road, was a piece of metal unlike anything he had ever seen. It was silvery, cool to the touch despite the impact, and had a strange, almost organic texture. It was about the size of his hand and surprisingly lightweight. It didn't look like any part of a car he recognized. He felt a shiver run down his spine. Where did this come from? Looking up at the sky, he could unshake the feeling that this was a fragment of whatever had streaked across the sky moments before. Robert wasn't a UFO fanatic, but he was curious. This object felt alien. He decided to take it home. A few days passed, and his curiosity got the better of him. He knew about a local UFO research group, and he thought, who better to analyze this strange piece of metal? He contacted them, described what he had found, and arranged to send the fragment to them for proper analysis. He carefully packaged the metallic object and mailed it off, eagerly awaiting their expert opinion. He felt a sense of excitement, like he was on the verge of a major discovery. He had no idea he was about to step into a world of paranoia and fear. Just 2 days after mailing the fragment, Robert's ordinary life was shattered. There was a knock at his door. When he opened it, he found 2 men standing on his porch. They were dressed in identical, immaculate dark suits, which seemed odd for the summer heat. They were pale, almost unnaturally so, with emotionless, blank expressions. One of them spoke in a flat, monotone voice, without any introduction or pleasantries. "We're here for the object you found," the man said. Robert was taken aback. How did they know? He hadn't told anyone except the UFO group. He asked them who they were, who they worked for. The men simply stared at him with their cold, dark eyes. They offered no identification, no badges, nothing. Instead, they began reciting personal details about him. They knew his name, his age, where he worked, even the names of his family members. It was terrifyingly accurate. They knew things that no stranger should know. The message was clear, even if it was unspoken. They weren't asking, they were demanding. The second man, who had been silent until now, spoke in the same strange, robotic tone. "It would be in your best interest, for your own health and safety, to give us what you found." The threat was veiled, but it hung in the air like a thick fog. Robert, completely unnerved, told them the truth. He didn't have it anymore. He had sent it away for analysis. The men's faces remained blank, but a flicker of something annoyance perhaps crossed their eyes. Without another word, they turned and walked away, disappearing as quickly as they had appeared. Robert was left standing at his door, his heart pounding in his chest. Who were those men? The visit left Robert deeply shaken. He tried to rationalize it. Maybe they were government agents. But why the secrecy? Why the intimidation? His sense of unease grew over the next few days. He started feeling like he was being watched. A black, late-model Cadillac seemed to be everywhere he went. It would be parked down the street from his house in the morning and would be in the rearview mirror as he drove to work. It was always there, a silent, menacing presence. Then came the second visit. This time, it was a different man, but he was just as strange. He was younger than the first 2, but he had the same pale skin and unsettling, emotionless demeanor. He didn't bother with the dark suit, but his presence was even more menacing. He cornered Robert and got straight to the point. His voice was cold and sharp. "We know you're being difficult," the man said. "Cooperation is not optional." Then, the threat became deeply personal. The man mentioned Robert's girlfriend by name. He described where she lived, where she worked. He made it clear that if Robert didn't retrieve the metal fragment and stop talking about it, something bad might happen to her. It would be a shame if she had an accident, the man said, his eyes locking onto Robert's. "You wouldn't want her to get hurt, would you?" This was a new level of terror. They weren't just threatening him anymore. They were threatening the people he cared about. The psychological pressure was immense. The black Cadillac continued its relentless surveillance, a constant reminder of the unseen forces that had invaded his life. He felt trapped, isolated. He couldn't go to the police. What'd he say? That strange men in suits were threatening him over a piece of metal he thought was from a UFO. They'd think he was crazy. In a state of panic, Robert contacted the UFO group he had sent the fragment to. He explained the terrifying situation, the visits, the threats. He desperately needed to know what they had found. Was the fragment real? Was it worth all this trouble? The group's response was another dead end, another layer to the mystery. They told him the package had arrived, but when they opened it, it was empty. The strange, silvery piece of metal was gone. It had vanished somewhere in transit. It was the final, baffling piece of the puzzle. How could it just disappear from a sealed package? Was it intercepted? Did the men in black get to it before the researchers did? With the fragment gone, there was no proof. Nothing to analyze, nothing to show anyone. It was just Robert's word against whom? He didn't even know who his tormentors were. Then, as suddenly as it all began, it stopped. The strange men never came back. The black Cadillac disappeared from his rearview mirror. The feeling of being watched slowly faded. Silence returned to Robert's life, but it was a changed silence. It was a silence filled with paranoia and unanswered questions. The experience had left a permanent scar. He was no longer the carefree 19-year-old he had been before that summer night. He had glimpsed a hidden world, a world of shadows and threats, and it had left him forever looking over his shoulder. Robert Richardson's story became a cornerstone of MIB lore. It has all the classic elements. An ordinary person finding potential evidence of extraterrestrial activity, followed by intimidating visits from mysterious, non-human-like figures who seem to know everything about them. Their goal is always the same: suppress the evidence and silence the witness. They operate outside the law, using fear and psychological warfare as their primary weapons. What makes Robert's case so compelling is its raw, terrifying simplicity. He wasn't a UFO hunter seeking attention. He was just a kid who stumbled upon something he couldn't explain. The reaction to his innocent curiosity was swift and brutal. The men in black in a story weren't quirky government agents like in the movies. They were genuinely sinister, almost alien themselves, with their pale skin, monotone voices, and complete lack of emotion. Decades have passed since that summer in 1967. Robert Richardson's story has been told and retold, analyzed by but the central mystery remains. Who were those men? Were they government agents from a clandestine program tasked with cleaning up UFO evidence? If so, why the bizarre, theatrical methods? Why not just show a badge and claim national security? Or were they something else entirely? Some theorists suggest that the men in black are not human at all, but an unhuman intelligence. Perhaps the very beings flying the craft disguised to interact with us, to protect their own secrecy. This would explain their strange appearance, their robotic mannerisms, and their seemingly paranormal ability to gather information and appear and disappear at will. The disappearance of the fragment is also a key part of the puzzle. Did they have the ability to remotely remove it from the mail? Or was there an insider in the Postal Service or the UFO group? We will likely never know for sure. Robert Richardson was left with only a terrifying memory. His experience serves as a chilling warning that sometimes the most frightening things aren't the lights in the sky, but the shadows that walk among us on the ground. The mystery of what happened in Toledo, Ohio, remains unsolved, a dark and fascinating chapter in the enduring enigma of the men in black. It's the spring of 1968 in Jersey City. The world is a whirlwind of change, but for Mary Robinson, life is about to take a turn into the truly strange. One morning, she glances out her apartment window and sees it a stark, black sedan parked across the street. Inside, a man. He's pale, dressed in a dark suit, and he's just watching their building. This isn't a one-time thing. He's there the next day, and the day after that. An unnerving, silent sentinel. Mary's husband, Jack Robinson, was no stranger to the unusual. He was a dedicated UFO researcher, deeply involved in investigating the bizarre and unexplained phenomena filling the skies. But recently, the strangeness had followed him home. He'd been noticing things were off, subtle signs of intrusion. Papers on his desk slightly rearranged. Files moved just a fraction. He felt a creeping sense of being watched, a violation of his private space. Now, This man in the car seemed to confirm his deepest anxieties. The presence of the man in black became a daily fixture in their lives. He would arrive in the morning and sit in his car for hours, motionless, his gaze fixed on their apartment. He never approached, never spoke. He was just an ominous, unblinking presence. The psychological toll was immense. The feeling of being under constant surveillance, of having their every move monitored, began to wear on the Rob. Their home, once a sanctuary, now felt like a fishbowl. Jack confided in his fellow UFO researchers, including the well-known investigators Timothy Green, Beckley, and Jim Moseley. They were intrigued and deeply concerned. This wasn't just a story, it was happening in real time. Determined to get some proof, to capture this phantom, Beckley and Moseley decided to take action. They armed themselves with a camera and headed to Jersey City, finding the black sedan exactly where Jack had described it. They cautiously approached. The man inside remained still, seemingly oblivious. Beckley and Moseley managed to snap a photograph from a distance. The resulting image, though grainy and indistinct, would become legendary in the annals of ufology. It's one of the few, and arguably the most famous, alleged photographs of a real-life man in black. It captured the cold, anonymous threat that had haunted the Robinsons for weeks. The photograph was a watershed moment, but it didn't end the harassment. In fact, the strangeness escalated. The Robinsons started noticing other men in dark suits. They would linger in the hallways of their apartment building, stand on street corners nearby, or sit on park benches, always watching. They moved with an unnerving coordination, like pieces on a chessboard controlled by an unseen hand. The sense of being surrounded, of being caught in a web, was suffocating. Back inside their apartment, the subtle disturbances continued. A lock they knew they had fastened would be found unlocked. Important research notes would vanish, only to reappear in a completely different place days later. It was a campaign of quiet intimidation, designed to unsettle and disrupt. It wasn't just about observation anymore. It felt like a deliberate effort to interfere with Jack's work, to send a clear message. Stop digging. The pressure was immense. Every knock on the door, every passing shadow, sent a jolt of anxiety through them. They began to question their own sanity. Was this real, or was the stress of Jack's research finally getting to them? But the physical evidence, the moved objects, the tampered locks, and that chilling photograph was on the neon. They weren't imagining it. They were targets. Then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. One morning, the black sedan was gone. The pale man in the dark suit was no longer parked across the street. The other figures who had been lurking in the periphery also vanished without a trace. The silence that followed was almost as unnerving as the surveillance itself. It was over, but the experience left an indelible scar. The Robinsons never forgot the spring of 1968. The incident profoundly shaped the rest of their lives, and Jack's approach to his UFO research. They became far more cautious, more guarded. The sense of intrusion lingered long after the men in black disappeared. It served as a stark reminder that when you stare into the abyss of the unknown, sometimes the abyss stares back. The Jersey City surveillance case remains a cornerstone of MIB lore, a chilling testament to the high price that can be paid for seeking the truth. The year is 1961. The place, Minot, North Dakota. Paul Miller, an Air Force reserve, is about to have an experience that will redefine his understanding of reality and plunge him into a world of silent, shadowy figures. This isn't just another UFO story. This is a story about what happens asterisk after asterisk. The sighting, it was a quiet night, like any other in the vast, open fields of North Dakota. Paul Miller was with a few companions, enjoying the stillness of the rural landscape. Suddenly, the darkness was shattered. A brilliant, glowing object descended from the sky, hovering silently over a nearby field. It wasn't just the craft that held them captive. It was the figures they saw moving within its ethereal light. What were a tay? Panic and confusion took hold. In a moment of fear, Miller raised his rifle and fired a shot towards the object. What happened next is a blur, a void in time. One moment, they were standing there, rifle smoke curling into the cold night air. The next, Several hours had inexplicably vanished. They couldn't account for the lost time, a chilling gap in their memory that left them with more questions than answers. Shaken, they made their way back, the image of the glowing object and its occupants seared into their minds. They tried to piece together the missing hours, but it was like trying to grasp smoke. The night's events felt surreal, a dream they couldn't wake from. The following day, Miller went to his office at the Air Force Base, hoping the routine of work would ground him. But normalcy was a luxury he would no longer have. As he sat at his desk, two men walked in. They didn't belong. They were dressed in immaculate, dark suits that seemed out of place in the military environment. Their faces were pale, expressionless, and their eyes seemed to look right through him. They carried no identification, offered no introduction, yet they knew everything about him. One of the men opened a dossier. It was thick, filled with papers. As he spoke, it became terrifyingly clear that this wasn't an official military inquiry. They knew his service record, yes, but they also knew things no one should know. They recited intimate details of his personal life, his habits, his family, his history. Information that was private, sealed away. The message was implicit and chilling. "We know who you are, Paul. We know everything." They spoke in a flat, monotone voice, devoid of any emotion. Then came the warning, delivered with the cold precision of a surgeon's scalpel. "You will forget what you saw," one of them said. It wasn't a request, it was an order. They never raised their voices, but the threat hung heavy in the air. They warned him to cease all discussion of the incident, to erase it from his memory. They didn't say what would happen if he didn't comply. They didn't have to. The dossier sitting on his desk was proof enough of their reach. After delivering their message, they turned and walked out, leaving a bewildered and terrified Paul Miller in their wake. Who were they? CIA? FBI? Some other unknown agency. They never identified themselves, melting away as mysteriously as they had appeared. The terror didn't end when the men in black left his office. For the next several days, a new shadow fell over Miller and his companions. A sleek, black sedan, an unmarked car with tinted windows, began to follow them. It was always there, a constant, silent observer. It would be parked down the street from their homes, follow them on their drives, and then disappear, only to reappear later. The feeling of being watched was suffocating. Every turned corner, every glance in the rearview mirror confirmed their fears. They weren't just being warned, they were being monitored. The psychological pressure mounted. The surveillance was a constant reminder of the warning they had received. It was a clear message that their every move was under scrutiny. The black car was a physical manifestation of the invisible power that had entered their lives. The men in black weren't just a one-time visit. They were a persistent presence, an organization that could tail you for days without ever making direct contact again. This relentless, silent intimidation was designed to break them, to ensure their silence through pure, unadulterated fear. The pressure wasn't just external. It began to seep into Miller's professional life at the Air Force Base. Colleagues who were once friendly became distant. Conversations would stop when he entered a room. He would catch hushed whispers and sideways glances. A few trusted friends pulled him aside, their faces etched with concern. They hinted that word had come down from higher up. They didn't know the details, but they knew that Miller was under a microscope. He was being watched not just by the men in the black sedan, but by the very institution he served. His career, his reputation, his life within the Air Force, it was all suddenly on shaky ground. The message from his peers was clear. Be careful. Paul, someone powerful is interested in you. This created a profound sense of isolation. He was trapped between an unknown, menacing organization and a military structure that seemed to be cooperating with them, or at the very least, turning a blind eye. He was on his own, with a secret he was warned never to tell, yet one that was clearly known by shadowy figures at the highest levels. Eventually, as mysteriously as it all began, it started to fade. The black sedan was seen less and less, until one day, it was gone for good. The whispers at the base died down. Life, on the surface, seemed to return to some semblance of normal. The direct, overt intimidation ceased. But for Paul Miller, nothing would ever be normal again. The experience had left an indelible scar on his psyche. The unease never truly went away. It lingered in the back of his mind, a constant, low-level hum of anxiety. How could he forget the sight of the glowing craft, the figures inside, the missing hours? And most of all, how could he forget the cold, dead eyes of the men in black and the dossier they held? Filled with the secrets of his life, they had stripped away his sense of security, his belief in a rational world. They had shown him that there were powers operating the shadows, powers with incredible reach and a singular goal: to enforce silence. Paul Miller's encounter in Minot, North Dakota, in 1961, would go down in history not just as a UFO sighting, but as one of the most stark and chilling examples of Men in Black intimidation ever recorded. His story serves as a terrifying testament to the lengths some will go to keep the truth buried. The year is 1953, and a man named Albert K. Bender is on the verge of a breakthrough. As the founder of the International Flying Saucer Bureau, or IFSB, he spent years collecting, analyzing, and publishing reports about strange objects in the sky. He's a central figure in the burgeoning UFO community, a hub for eyewitness accounts and speculation. Bender is so confident in his research that he publicly announces he has discovered a vital piece of the puzzle, a piece that could finally solve the entire flying saucer mystery. He plans to publish his findings in the upcoming issue of his newsletter, Space Review. But that issue would never see the light of day. What happened next would not only silence Bender, but also give birth to one of the most enduring and chilling legends in UFO folklore: the Men in Black. The story goes that shortly after making his bold claim, Bender received a visit. It wasn't the press or fellow researchers who came knocking at his door in Bridgeport, Connecticut. It was something else entirely. 3 figures, all dressed in immaculate, dark black suits, materialized in his room. They didn't use the door. They simply appeared. Bender would later describe them as being otherworldly, with an unsettling aura that seemed to drain the warmth from the room. Their faces were indistinct, almost shadowy. But their eyes glowed with a faint, menacing light. They moved with a strange, gliding stiffness, as if unfamiliar with human locomotion. Their message was simple and delivered not through spoken words, but telepathically, a voice echoing directly inside Bender's mind. He was to immediately cease all investigation into flying saucers. He was to shut down the IFSB and forget everything he had discovered. The figures warned him that he had come too close to a truth that humanity was not ready for. They imparted information to him, a torrent of data and images that confirmed his theories but also terrified him. The experience left him physically ill and deeply shaken. The men vanished as mysteriously as they had arrived, leaving behind only a lingering smell of sulfur and an overwhelming sense of dread. True to their command, Bender was a changed man. He became withdrawn and paranoid. He immediately halted the publication of Space Review, pulling the issue that was supposed to contain his groundbreaking revelation. He was so terrified that he reportedly couldn't eat for days. His friends and fellow researchers were baffled. The once passionate and outspoken leader of the UFO community had been reduced to a frightened shadow of his former self. He tried to explain what had happened, but his story was so bizarre, so surreal, that many struggled to believe him. Men in black suits, with glowing eyes who appeared out of thin air. It sounded like something from a science fiction novel, not a real-life event in suburban Connecticut. But the visitors weren't finished with him. Bender reported a second visitation. This time, the experience was even more intense. He felt a wave of dizziness wash over him, his head spinning as if he were being pulled into another dimension. Visions flooded his mind. Strange alien landscapes, advanced technology, and non-human entities. He felt as though he was being shown the reality behind the UFO phenomenon, a reality that was far more complex and frightening than he could have ever imagined. The encounter left him with a severe headache that lasted 4 days and an even deeper sense of violation. He knew he had no choice but to comply with their demands. Following this final, terrifying encounter, Bender officially dissolved the International Flying Saucer Bureau. In a final, cryptic message to his members, he announced that the flying saucer mystery had indeed been solved, but that the information was being withheld by a higher source. He wrote, "We advise those engaged in saucer work to please be very cautious. It was a chilling warning from a man who had clearly seen something that had broken his spirit. He refused to elaborate further, shrouding his discovery in a permanent veil of secrecy and fear. His abrupt and unexplained withdrawal from the field sent shockwaves through the UFO community. Why would a man on the cusp of revealing everything suddenly go silent? Bender's story became a foundational myth. For years, he refused to speak about the incident in detail. His silence only fueled the speculation. Who were these men? Were they government agents tasked with silencing UFO witnesses? Or were they something not of this world, guardians of a cosmic secret? The description Bender provided: the black suits, the strange demeanor, the glowing eyes. The telepathic communication became the template for the Men in Black archetype. Countless other witnesses in the decades that followed would report similar encounters with mysterious, intimidating figures who warned them to stay silent. It wasn't until 1962, nearly a decade later, that Bender finally broke his silence and published a book titled Flying Saucers and the Three Men. In it, he elaborated on his experience, claiming that the Men in Black were not government agents, but were, in fact, aliens themselves. He described their underground base in Antarctica and their purpose for being on Earth. However, the book was written in a strange, almost fictionalized style, which led many of his former colleagues to dismiss it as a work of fantasy, perhaps a way for Bender to process the trauma he had experienced. Some believe he deliberately obscured the truth in allegory to protect himself. Others think the entire event may have been a psychological breakdown brought on by the stress of his research. Regardless of the ultimate truth behind his account, Albert Bender's 1953 encounter remains a pivotal moment in ufology. It marked a shift in the public perception of UFO research, transforming it from a hobby for curious skywatchers into a potentially dangerous pursuit. It introduced an element of paranoia and conspiracy that has persisted to this day. The image of the silent, menacing man in the black suit, appearing from nowhere to enforce a cosmic silence, is an indelible part of our modern mythology. Did Bender truly uncover a secret so profound that it required an otherworldly intervention to suppress? Or was he the victim of a sophisticated psychological operation, or his own overwrought imagination? The answer, like the one he claimed to have found, remains hidden, locked away by a higher source, leaving us to wonder about the men who walk in shadow. After Bender shut down his organization, a writer from West Virginia named Gray Barker decided he had to know why. He started his own investigation, eventually meeting Bender himself and collecting a trove of similar, unsettling stories from other UFO researchers across the country. The more he dug, the clearer it became that Bender wasn't an isolated case. A pattern was emerging, one of intimidation and silenced witnesses. Barker was pulling at a thread, and he had no idea what he was about to unravel. In 1953, the mystery landed right on Barker's doorstep. While staying in a hotel during his research travels, a man in a crisp, dark suit confronted him. This wasn't a friendly chat. The man's tone was cold, his eyes devoid of warmth. A told Barker, in no uncertain terms, to stop his inquiries. He said Barker was getting too close to a truth he wasn't meant to know. The message was clear: drop the investigation or face consequences. This encounter wasn't just a warning, it was a confirmation. Barker was onto something big, something someone desperately wanted to keep hidden. The experience didn't deter Barker. It fueled him. For the next 8 years, he continued his work. documenting strange encounters and compiling a dossier of witness testimonies. Then, in 1961, another piece of the puzzle fell into place. He went to visit a fellow researcher, Paul Henderson. Henderson was visibly shaken. He recounted a recent visit from two men. They weren't from any government agency he recognized. They were dressed in black suits and had an unnerving, almost artificial demeanor. These men weren't interested in Henderson's research in general. They wanted one specific thing: a faded photograph of a UFO that Henderson possessed. Their demand was polite, but firm, carrying an unspoken threat. Henderson, intimidated, handed it over. The men took the photo, gave a curt nod, and left as silently as they had arrived. As Henderson finished his story, Barker glanced out the window. Parked down the street was a pristine, black sedan, the kind you rarely saw in their small town. It sat there, gleaming under the streetlights, looking completely out of place. A chill ran down Barker's spine. Was it a coincidence, or were they being watched right now? The car eventually drove off, but the feeling of being monitored lingered. The incident with Henderson wasn't just a story anymore. It was happening in real time. Later that night, returning to his own home, Barker found his sense of security completely shattered. His office was in disarray. Files were strewn across the floor. His desk drawers were open, and his carefully organized research notes had been rifled through. Nothing of monetary value was stolen. His wallet, some cash on the desk, all untouched. The intruders had been looking for something specific. They had gone through his files, his correspondence, his photographs. It was a targeted search. They were looking for what he knew. The message was the same one he'd received in that hotel room 8 years earlier, but this time it was delivered without a single word. Stop digging. These experiences, the warning in the hotel, the story from Henderson, the black car. The ransacked office all began to connect in Barker's mind. He saw a sinister web of coordinated efforts to suppress information about UFOs. These weren't random events. This was a campaign. He realized that the men who visited Henderson were the same type of individuals who had confronted him, and likely countless others. They were methodical, intimidating, and always seemed to know exactly where to look and who to pressure. This realization became the foundation of his groundbreaking work. Barker took all these disparate accounts, his own experiences, Bender's story, Henderson's encounter, and dozens of others he had collected, and wove them together. He chronicled the strange visits, the odd questions, the veiled threats, and the overwhelming sense of dread that followed these encounters. He documented their signature look, the dark suits, the emotionless faces, the mysterious black cars. In 1962, he published his findings in a book titled "They Knew Too Much About Flying Saucers." It was the first time these stories were presented to the public as a cohesive phenomenon. Barker didn't just tell stories. He created a framework. He gave a name to the shadowy figures who worked to keep the UFO mystery under wraps. Through his book, the legend of the Men in Black was born, stepping out of the whispers of the UFO community and into the mainstream consciousness. Gray Barker had taken a series of frightening, isolated incidents and exposed them as the work of a single, terrifying entity. It's a bright, sunny day, May 23rd, 1964. Ray Jim Templeton, a firefighter from Carlisle, England, enjoying a family outing at a picturesque spot called Bergmarsh, overlooking the Solway Firth. You've brought your camera, a Pentacon FASL 80, to capture some memories. Your 5-year-old daughter, Elizabeth, is happily picking flowers. So you frame the shot, click the shutter, and think nothing of it. You take 2 more photos of her and then head home, content with a perfect family day. A few days later, you get the film developed. As the chemist hands you the prints, he points to one and says, "What's that strange thing in the background?" You look at the photo of Elizabeth, the one where she's holding the flowers. And there it is. Standing just behind her, slightly to the left, is a figure. It's tall, clad in what looks like a white, bulky suit, complete with a dark visor or helmet. It looks for all the world like a spaceman. But how? There was no one else there. Just you, your wife Annie, and your daughter. You remember seeing 2 elderly ladies sitting in a car a few hundred yards away, but that was it. This figure, ... It was right behind Elizabeth. You're baffled. You send the photos to the local newspaper, the Cumberland News. They pick up the story, and from there, it explodes. It's syndicated worldwide, even reaching the Daily Mail and the Daily Express in London. The Solway Firth spaceman becomes an overnight sensation. Kodak, the film manufacturer, gets involved. They offer free film for life to anyone who can prove the photograph was faked. They examine the negative themselves, running every test they can think of. Their conclusion: the negative is genuine. It hasn't been tampered with, double exposed, or manipulated in any way. The figure was there when the shutter clicked. The story gets even stranger. Shortly after the photo goes public, a letter arrives from Australia. It's from the Woomera Proving Ground, a top-secret missile test range. They explain that a Blue Streak rocket launch, scheduled for the same day the photo was taken, had to be aborted. Why? Why? Because two large unidentified figures were seen on the firing range monitors, walking around the launch pad. Technicians at the launch site said the figures looked exactly like the one in your photograph. Coincidence? It's a chilling thought. A rocket launched thousands of miles away, halted by figures that matched the one you accidentally captured on camera. But the most bizarre chapter of this story is yet to come. A few weeks later, two men show up at Jim Templeton's workplace. They are dressed in dark suits, driving a dark Jaguar car. They don't give their names, referring to each other only by numbers. Number 9 and number 11. They say they're from the government, but their identification is vague. Just a card with a number on it. They ask Jim to take them back to Bergmarsh, to the exact spot where he took the photograph. Out on the marsh, their behavior is peculiar. They ask strange questions, not about the figure itself, but about the weather conditions that day. The behavior of the local animals. They seem almost alien in their line of questioning. Then, number 9 turns to Jim and asks, "Do you know what we look like?" When Jim says he doesn't, the man replies, "Like Men in Black." It's a phrase that would only become famous years later. They ask Jim if he saw the figure with his own eyes. He says no, only in the developed photo. They become agitated, insistent that he must have seen something. They try to get him to admit he just photographed an ordinary man walking by. Jim stands his ground. The photo is real, and there was no one else there. Frustrated, the two men abruptly end the interview. As they drive away, number 9 turns to Jim and says one last thing. "It would be better for you if you forgot about all of this." They drive off, leaving Jim standing alone on the marsh, more confused and unsettled than ever. He never saw or heard from them again. Who were they? Were they really from the government, trying to cover something up? Or were they something else entirely? Their strange demeanor, their numbered identities, their unmarked career, all fits the classic Men in Black archetype. Over the years, many theories have emerged to explain the Solway spacemen. Skeptics have proposed various explanations. One popular theory is that the figure is simply Jim's wife, Annie, who was standing behind their daughter with her back to the camera. The argument is that her blue dress, overexposed by the bright sunlight, appears white in the photograph. Her dark hair, they say, creates the illusion of a helmet. Jim Templeton always refuted this. He was adamant that his wife was out of the frame, standing to his left when he took that specific picture. He even pointed to the other photos from the same roll, showing what his wife was wearing that day, which didn't match the figure. Another theory suggested a simple case of parallax on object much closer to the lens appearing large and out of focus in the background. Perhaps it was a leaf, a piece of paper, or even Jim's own thumb accidentally intruding into the frame. But again, look at the photo. The figure has a distinct shape, a form that looks humanoid. It has what appears to be a head, a torso, and arms. Could a random object so perfectly mimic a person in a suit? And what about the Men in Black? If it was just an overexposed photo of his wife, why would government agents, or whoever they were, show up and intimidate him? Why would they connect his family photos to a top-secret missile launch in Australia? The details just don't add up. The two events, separated by thousands of miles, seem impossibly linked by this one single photograph. The Woomera incident adds a layer of credibility that's hard to dismiss. Were these figures extraterrestrial observers, monitoring our technological progress? For the rest of his life, Jim Templeton maintained his story. He never changed a single detail. He wasn't a man seeking fame or fortune. He was a firefighter, a grounded, credible witness who stumbled into something he couldn't explain. He passed away in 2011, taking many of the answers with him. The negative still exists, a tangible piece of this enduring mystery. Today, the Solway Firth spaceman remains one of the most compelling and debated pieces of photographic evidence in the history of ufology. Was it a trick of the light? A photographic anomaly? Or did Jim Templeton capture something truly out of this world on that sunny afternoon in 1964? A silent visitor from another place, briefly revealed by the click of a camera. The photo doesn't offer easy answers. It just hangs there, a haunting and beautiful enigma, asking a question we may never be able to answer. The sightings of the winged figure were one thing, a terrifying anomaly that haunted the skies over Point Pleasant. But the events that followed on the ground introduced a new, more insidious layer of fear. It began subtly. A phone call with an odd, metallic voice on the other end. A knock on the door at an unusual hour. Standing on the doorstep would be men. Always men. Dressed in immaculate, often brand-new-looking black suits. Their skin was sometimes described as oddly pale or unnaturally tanned. Their facial features strangely indistinct, almost like a poorly made mask. They rarely blinked. These weren't your typical government investigators. They didn't flash badges or present official credentials. They often arrived in pristine, vintage-model black cars, like a Cadillac or a Buick, that looked as though they had just rolled off the assembly line, yet were models from years past. The cars themselves were a paradox, spotless and silent, adding to the surreal nature of the encounters. When they spoke, their speech patterns were often stilted, their language formal, but somehow off. They would ask questions, but not in the way a police officer or a federal agent would. Their inquiries were laser-focused, unnervingly specific, hinting at knowledge they shouldn't possess. They knew details about the witness's sighting that had never been shared publicly, sometimes even details the witness themselves had forgotten. Mary Heyer, a respected reporter for the Athens Messenger, became a central figure in this bizarre chapter. As a local correspondent, she was the go-to person for anyone who had experienced something strange. She diligently documented the Mothman sightings, but soon she became a target herself. Men in black suits began visiting her office, questioning her about her reports. They didn't threaten her outright. Their methods were far more psychological. They would issue vague warnings, advising her to stop her investigations for her own good. They'd imply that her work was interfering with matters of national security, but would never elaborate. The visits left her shaken, filled with a sense of dread she couldn't quite explain. It was a quiet, persistent pressure designed to instill doubt and fear. Others who had come forward with their stories experienced similar phenomena. Some reported that after a visit, personal items, particularly photos or notes related to their sighting, would mysteriously disappear from their homes. There were no signs of forced entry, no mess, just a void where the evidence used to be. The feeling of being watched became pervasive. Witnesses spoke of seeing the same black cars parked down their street for hours, or following them as they drove into town. The surveillance was constant but deniable, a form of psychological warfare that made them question their own sanity. Were they imagining it? Or was there really a shadowy organization systematically erasing all proof of the bizarre events unfolding in their small town? The questions they asked were deeply unsettling. They wouldn't just ask, "What did you see?" They'd ask, "What was the exact frequency of the sound you heard?" Or what was your emotional state at 10:17 p.m. on the night of the sighting? It was as if they were collecting data, not investigating a crime. Some witnesses, like the Partridge family, were visited and told things about their private conversations, proving they had been under surveillance long before they made any official report. The Meebs seemed to know what the witnesses were going to say before they even said it. This unnerving omniscience was perhaps their most terrifying trait. They weren't just investigating the sightings. They seemed to be part of the phenomenon itself, moving through the community like ghosts, their purpose unknown, their origin a complete mystery. One of the most chilling aspects of these encounters was the effect the MIB had on those they visited. Witnesses often reported feeling physically ill after a visit, suffering from headaches, nausea, and an overwhelming sense of fatigue and disorientation. It was as if their very presence drained the energy from the room, leaving a palpable coldness behind. They seemed to operate just outside the bounds of normal human interaction. Their attempts to appear normal were what made them so profoundly abnormal. They might laugh at something that wasn't funny, or use slang that was decades out of date. It was a performance, but a flawed one. As if an alien intelligence was trying to mimic human behavior based on a faulty instruction manual. The peak of this strange activity seemed to coincide with the months leading up to the tragic collapse of the Silver Bridge on December 15, 1967. This catastrophe, which claimed 46 lives, marked a horrifying end to the year of wonders and terror in Point Pleasant. In the immediate aftermath, the Mothman sightings ceased, and just as suddenly, the visits from the men in black faded away. They vanished as quickly and mysteriously as they had arrived, leaving behind a community traumatized not only by the bridge disaster, but by the lingering unanswered questions. Who were these men? Were they government agents from a clandestine program trying to cover up advanced technology tests? Or were they something else entirely? Non-human entities with an agenda beyond our comprehension. The legacy of the men in black in Point Pleasant is one of profound unease. They represent the chilling idea that there are forces at work in the world that operate in the spaces between what we know and what we fear. They are the silent observers, the data collectors, the enforcers of a silence we don't understand. The stories from 1967 paint a picture of an intelligence that is patient, methodical, and utterly alien. They didn't use brute force. They used psychological manipulation, sowing paranoia and doubt until witnesses were too afraid to speak, or worse, began to believe they had imagined the whole thing. They are the keepers of secrets, a human-shaped question mark that still hangs over the Ohio Valley. Thank you for joining Night Whisper. The men in black linger in the shadows, government agents, or something stranger. Keep your eyes open, your doors locked, and share your thoughts below. Until next time, stay curious.